Greetings, everyone. You've stumbled upon Esoteric Babble. Today, we're going to discuss a line of verse from the Dhammapada. This is chapter 14. I believe the chapter is called Buddhavago, or the chapter on Buddha. And we might even say on awakening. This one phrase, and let me give you the number here if you're interested in tracking it down. It's verse 182 from the Dhammapada. Kiccho manussapaṭilābho. Kiccho manussapaṭilābho. That is, it is rare to obtain. We have to maybe insert something like the birth or a human rebirth, a human incarnation, perhaps. If you don't like the name incarnation, a human rebirth, or it's hard or rare to obtain a human form. Now, of course, this comes from a point of view and understanding that sentient beings go through countless and countless and countless iterations of rebirths, and we could say reincarnation. There might be people who quibble with that, but roughly speaking, we are talking about when you or I, when our mortal body perishes, that sort of our stream of consciousness is going to unite with some other body and arise. And it could be that we're born as, I suppose, some sort of wild animal or domesticated animal or insect. Who knows the sorts of beings that could exist. And some of them are mentioned actually in the Diamond Sutra, or at least the types that there might be life forms that don't even have perceptions. They list, I'm not sure where that is, but it's not a long sutra. You can probably find that. And it's something like whether these animals come from, or beings come from wombs or not wombs, or so on and so forth. And they're talking about how bodhisattvas are committed to liberating all of these sentient beings from this endless realm, or not realm, but this endless cycle of birth, rebirth, birth, death, the what is known as samsara. The point is that it's actually difficult. Like, we find ourselves as humans, we might not think there's anything extraordinary about that. I mean, this is the only life we pretty much know, unless we can recall past lives. And so we don't have a lot to compare it to. But the issue there isn't simply that it's, obviously it's good to be born as a human being because you're at a higher level, say, than a lot of animals and insects and creatures that basically just every moment is about survival, and there's probably a lot of misery and suffering, and you don't usually have to go too far to see this sort of thing happening. So to be a human being is a bit above that. And of course, there are plenty of human beings who suffer tremendously, but we have at least the capability of pondering our existence and sort of taking, how should we say, or we have the ability to learn from the teaching. And so that is, already, if you think about, there are probably trillions and trillions of ants on the planet, and who knows how many gnats or mites. Yeah, it seems like 9 billion people, but we're vastly outnumbered by all sorts of other creatures. So even if we stuck to our planet Earth, it's very, if you're rolling the dice, you're probably going to come up an insect or something, or, even a plant. who knows? But the flip side of that is, of course, in like the Buddhist scheme, even the Theravada Buddhist scheme, there are many, many levels above humans. Many, many like Deva worlds or Brahma Loka, where things are much more splendid and easy. But the interesting thing about that is, if you're born in one of these heavenly realms, you're actually less likely to strive after liberation. And the reason for that is because you have it. Things are, in terms of like your material situation is such that you don't really suffer. So you don't ever feel the need, as the Buddha did when he saw someone old and, sick and dying, that he thought, well, I have to get to the bottom of this. And so again, if you're born in one of these other heavenly realms, you're not as likely to seek sort of a cessation to the cycle of birth and death. You may not even know much about it. And one way that you can know that this is kind of true is that in the Pali Canon, and I think even in the Mahayana Sutras, there are always gods, or at least in, say, again, the Diamond Sutra, I think gods are in attendance when the Buddha is delivering that teaching to Subhuti. And likewise, in the Pali Canon, there are many, many, many episodes where gods, goddesses come to the Buddha and ask him questions. Now, you would normally think gods would be in possession of this great, they would be super sentient and they would have all this other accrued wisdom. But I think the point about that is that just what we said before, if you're born into that sort of material condition, you may not develop any sort of theory or teaching or techniques for trying to overcome your material condition, because there's nothing to overcome. It's, so blissful for you. And now some of the more skeptical among you might just out of hand reject this idea of gods or super sentient beings, even if we were to allow the fact that, there could be aliens and, extremely advanced aliens. But I would say another way you could think about this, and one way there's not a lot of ambiguity, say, in the term deva, but I do think that word deva is a word for God in Pali and in Sanskrit, and it's definitely related. I mean, you can hear it to the Latin deus, and actually even in Greek theos. So those words all come from the same Proto-Indo-European root. But that word could be applied to like a king, someone noble, sort of a way of, addressing someone who's your superior. And we could kind of think of it as if you were to observe the different strata of humans, or, our society. I mean, we all meet with the same end, and we all have to eat, and, we all have biological functions and everything, but there's a small class of people for whom there are not any material barriers. There's not even the thought of, I need to make money, I need to pay my rent. They've been born into a world where everything is just easy on that level, and they set their mind, or, they do, they come at their life from that point of view. And so you might think, like, actually, they are probably less likely to seek out the spiritual path. And we have in the West a very good, I mean, we've all heard it in the West, going back to the teaching of Jesus, that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And that is an exact equivalent. I mean, that's just how you can understand this idea of it's difficult to be born a human being. And not only that, it's difficult to be born at the level where you are going to strive, but you have the ability. I mean, we could have been born slaves. We could be born and die when we're 1 year old because we don't have 1 year old, 1 years old, because we haven't gotten enough to eat. We could contract all kinds of sicknesses and so on and so forth, or we could be born into a society where any sort of inquiry or all inquiry, it must be approved by, the authorities in control. So it's a really rare situation if you find yourself in if we find ourselves in a situation, let's put it like this, where we have some autonomy, we can inquire into things, maybe our lives are sort of, compared to other people, a struggle. We still have this ability. And actually the struggle is what is motivating. I mean, that motivated the Buddha. Seeing people. He didn't actually struggle, but he was motivated by seeing it. Not other, notice not everyone else in his position was like that. There have been others, of course. Saint Francis came from a very wealthy family and gave it all up. And this is why, I'll end on this note. I'll be a little polemical. This is why that the whole prosperity gospel is a load of crap, if I might use a technical term there. I apologize for that scientific sort of jargon, but you just know that it has nothing at all to do with the spiritual path. I mean, we have too many examples from about any tradition that it's actually the opposite way around. And I think it's one of the meanings, for those who are sort of investigate tarot cards, that's one of the meanings of the hanged man, actually, the person who's upside down. That the world sees the person as upside down because that person's values have changed. And to that person hanging upside down, the rest of the world is upside down, or they're oriented in the wrong direction because their thoughts are not, their thoughts are here in the material realm, and they're not forging bonds. They're not engaging in actions which forge bonds with the non-material, let's put it that way. And I think that's the question. So, it's easy, it's easy to see the speck of dust in someone else's eye, but we have to ask ourselves, are we forging those bonds? Are we lessening the bonds of physicality? Trying not to get tied so much to possessions and even sensuality and so on and so forth. So that's where I leave it, sort of a question. And I think that's why that's the teaching here in the Dhammapada. Kiccho manussapaṭilābho. It is a rare thing indeed to obtain a human birth, and we should not squander it. Peace, everyone. And may all beings everywhere be happy and free from oppression.